Good afternoon and welcome back to USTA Florida's Here to Serve podcast. My name is Laura Bowen and I'm the Executive Director at USTA Florida. As we kick off a new year, many of us are looking to set new professional and personal goals. What does it mean to have a growth mindset, and how do we go about setting goals that set us up for professional and personal success? Well, today's podcast is going to tackle that and more. I'm pleased to be joined by Natalie Pedroze and Rory Curren from USTA's Learning and Leadership Development team. We're going to talk about what it means to have a growth mindset. And we'll also talk about some of the assumptions and beliefs that we all hold that keep us from growing and innovating for the future. I'm happy to share this podcast with you as the first in our new series of topics and dates for 2024. Enjoy the pod and be sure to leave us a comment or a question on our social media channels. Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Natalia and Rory, for joining me today for our first podcast of the new year. It's great to have you here.
Thank
Thank
you
you for having us.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. Happy 2024. I can't believe we're saying that. Like, when did it become 2024?
I don't know.
I do not know. I do not know. Well, I'm just going to dive right in, and you're both new to the pod, which makes me super happy. I love having new people on the podcast, so I'd love to have you both kind of share a little bit about your backgrounds and, you know, what you do in sort of the HR and talent development side, and then how you found yourself at USTA. So, Natalia, why don't I start with you, and then we'll go over to Rory.
Thanks. I'm really excited. I'm actually a really big fan of the podcast. I actually follow you. I'm always clicking like, so if you go back in the history,
You're like, yeah, you're the super fan, and I appreciate that. We send you presents later for that.
Oh, thanks. I'll take them. My career has always been, and it truly has been, the people and culture space, right? So it's not what I call human resources, which can sometimes be one category of the bigger space. There's always been about talent. I started my career in talent acquisition, spent about 15 years in that space, grew into a leadership role, and then eventually had the opportunity to go into a program manager role where I had the great job of designing programs for leadership development for emerging engineers, internship programs, and apprenticeship programs. All of the work that I've done has been about developing talent, identifying it or developing it, even in the DEI space. And that's really how I landed with the USTA, was Marissa Grimes. I ended up working for the Chief Diversity Officer, came in here to develop a leadership development program, help attract, retain talent. And it's been a joy. I was actually really thinking about that since it's New Year. It's a reflection time. It's been a joy working for the USTA.
Oh, it's been a joy to have you. We actually had a mutual friend in common when you first started, which was so funny. And she said such nice things about you, and all of them have proven to be true. You're just an amazing human, and I've been grateful for the conversations and the time we've been able to spend together. Not enough time, but definitely enjoyed all the time that we've had. So welcome.
Same here, Laura. Same here.
So Rory, tell us your story.
Sure, I too am a fan of Natalia, and I'm not just saying that because I report into her, but I truly am. My journey is interesting, and much like Natalia, I think I have a passion for the space. My passion really comes from connecting people from point A to point B, and then watching the growth happen on the journey to get there. I think back to Rory in high school, and I originally wanted to be a government teacher at the high school level. And that has then evolved into, okay, I got my master's in HR and change management. I worked for several restaurant companies at their corporate level doing training management and developing training materials, culminating a couple of years ago when I took the leap to come over to the USTA in more of a leadership development role, working with our staff, our colleagues, to make sure that they are experiencing the type of growth that we want for them and that they want for themselves, and still connecting those dots from point A to point B, because that's what gets me up in the morning. That's what drives me. That's what I'm really passionate about. And the best thing about that is watching that light bulb go off.
Yeah.
And that's why I do what I do is watching that light bulb go off where somebody's like, that makes sense to me now.
It's enabling the learner, and everybody has a learner. I just think they don't know. So sometimes when they connect with us, it's giving themselves the grace of 5 minutes to actually talk about their learning and what they want to learn. And when it clicks, it's such a unique, special moment. I think that feeds both Rory and I to keep going.
And you can
Absolutely.
tell that about both of you. I mean, I've been able now to spend some time with Rory. You were over here in December and you helped with one of our leadership trainings. And similarly, it was kind of fun to see the light bulbs go off there as well. And you got to participate with one of the groups, which was also fun to watch. And yeah, you guys are just both wonderful to work with, and really appreciate all that you do. So with the new year starting, you mentioned this earlier, Natalia, I think a lot of people tend to use this time to sort of set goals for themselves personally and professionally, right? Why is this a good time for people to think about maybe developing some new skills? And what are some tips for doing this well without feeling overwhelmed? Like, oh, there's 1,000 things I need to improve. And so we'll go the opposite way now. Maybe Rory, you start, and then we'll follow up with Natalia.
You know, the first thing that comes to my mind, Laura, is this idea of New Year's resolutions. And in the new year, I'm sure the three of us have come up with some resolutions. And the unfortunate thing about resolutions is that come February, we tend to go back into our old self, 2023, and we hope that doesn't happen. With goals and focusing on yourself in the new year, I think you can really set a path forward, map out what you want to accomplish, right? And as we're setting goals professionally, how does your development weave into those professional goals? Work with your leaders, work with your peers to really hold yourself accountable to achieving those goals, and ask them quite simply, what can I do to make myself a better version of me, right? Because they might have an interesting perspective that sometimes we have our blinders on and we don't see our true self, where other people might be able to guide us a little bit more intently on where we want to go. And, you know, the idea of self-accountability is really challenging for people. And it's why oftentimes those resolutions expire in a month. But really focusing, having that growth mindset. And I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about growth mindset in a little bit, but that growth mindset and really being open and honest with yourself about what you want to accomplish, but setting yourself up for success by holding that accountability really, really close to yourself. And sometimes being hard on yourself, saying, and when I say that, I mean, it's okay to take a step back from work and focus on yourself. It's okay to take a Friday afternoon and do something that you want to do to accomplish your self and professional goals.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And, you know, I was thinking about, I pick one thing a year. Like I realized early on, like more than one thing was super hard to commit to, but it was like, if I could just pick one thing each year and say, this is the one area that I'm really going to devote time and energy to, I felt like it was a little bit more manageable. But also it helped me sort of maintain that focus throughout the year, and put those other things on sort of like, well, at the end of the year, I'll look at the rest of those things for the next year and the next year. And that really did help me. I started doing that probably 10 years ago, and it's definitely been good. And sometimes I've had to circle back to the things I did in the past that then I sort of fell off the wagon of, I'm not doing so good at time management. Maybe I need to go back and revisit that. So
when you map something out for the year, right, and you're beginning with the end in mind, by December of 2024, I want to accomplish this. When you peel it back and you have those little wins to keep yourself motivated and keep that momentum going, that's really important. We need to feel that satisfaction. We need to feel that momentum. We need to feel that we are accomplishing our goals. So being able to have those milestones keeps you focused on that end goal.
Yeah, I think both of you said two very important things. Number one, Rory is talking about the plan. You have to make a plan. That's really how you lose the consistency. And Laura, your point of less is more is very valid. You shouldn't focus, especially in the skill space, on more than one or 2 at the most, knowing that you still have a full-time job, a full-time life, right? But how do you make this skill something that you're so interested in that you can go ahead and grow it out for 12 months? And one thing that Rory mentioned, it's really the daily practice of accountability. How can you dedicate 15 minutes to do a quick reflection on yourself to say, yes, I succeeded in this skill. And when we think skills and we think broadly like communication, can you chunk that out to other smaller skills that you can build the plan that Rory's referring to? So taking the time to really reflect on what you want to do for the year, but then mapping it out to monthly and then daily goals is important. And the reflection is the one thing that'll help you win. And even if in that 15-minute reflection, you find an article to read on communication as an example, you'll be winning. But reflection is key.
Awesome. Well, talking about, reflecting, I've been reflecting on growth mindset a lot, actually, and what that really
hot topic.
It is a hot topic, and it's something that's really both fascinated me and at times frustrated me, when sometimes I hear people say, oh, I'm just not good at that. Right? Oh, and sometimes they'll tie it to their age or demographic. Like, I'm just not, you're young, so you can do this, or you're older, so you can do this. What does it really mean to have a growth mindset? And how can people embrace that approach, which goes with all the things we've been talking about, which is like learning new skills? So, Natalie, I'll come back to you, and then Rory, you can follow up.
So I think the things that you're saying are very limiting beliefs, right? So when you think of the opposite, it's when we limit ourselves. So growth mindset is really the belief that you have the ability and the intelligence to still learn, right? That's really, and it's not about just the effort. And this is the hard part that people don't understand. The growth mindset is getting to that place of learning. You're putting in the effort, but you're learning. And there are a lot of different things that you can do to develop a growth mindset. And one of them we're talking about today, right? It's learning and development. Having a love of learning is a big key to a growth mindset. Knowing that you can come back from failures is important too. Being able to take feedback from others. When Rory said that, I was in my brain, I was like, that's such a growth mindset. Because being able to take feedback from others and converting that to information of like, oh, not taking it personal, but being able to reflect on it and saying, I'm going to do it differently next time. That's conversion to learning. So that's really the important part. But it's critical to not say, oh, I have a growth mindset, which we hear a lot, by the way. Yeah. We hear that a lot. But it really is not about the effort. It's about when it converts to learning. And there's lots of different ways that I just mentioned that you can use to develop a growth mindset.
Yeah. And, that's funny. I think a key aspect of having a growth mindset is putting yourselves in what you perceive to be uncomfortable situations, right? Stepping out of your comfort zone and doing new things that maybe you've been reluctant to try in the past. And I have a little story. Last month, we had our holiday party, and I was sitting with a peer, and there was a group of people that I just did not know or did not have an opportunity to work with yet. And I
in a full tuxedo. Hold on, Laura. He did it in full tuxedo.
Nice.
Maybe we can put the picture up.
At the party, unfortunately, I did miss that party, but I heard it was.
You would have seen the tuxedo.
I'm sorry, I missed the tuxedo, so I'll have to go next year.
But I really made an intentional effort to walk around and introduce myself to the people I did not know. And I got back to sit with my friend, and she said, I'm really surprised you did that, because typically you're kind of not as, and she didn't mean this in a bad way, but you're not as outgoing. And I really have a hard time initiating that conversation, but I was really intentional to do so. And as a leader in the organization, I wanted to set the tone for, what that should look like for other people. So I reflected on that, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. That was uncomfortable for me, but I'm really happy I did it, because that sparked conversation with people that I otherwise would not have had an opportunity to talk to. So putting yourself in a situation that may be uncomfortable just is really powerful to have that growth mindset. Conversely, one thing that we typically hear in organizations, and not just the USDA, but all organizations, is, well, that's just the way we've always done it, right? that fixed mindset is so paralyzing to growth, because we find comfort in the things that we just always do. The wheels are churning, but they're just turning over and over, and there's no real momentum built, right? So whenever I hear that's just the way we've always done it, it hurts a little bit, but I want to make sure that we can use that when people say it, and then say, okay, well, what if we tried something a little bit differently, right? What if we did this instead of that? And that's thinking about, yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's the land of innovation that we all want to get to. We're trying to make this sport, a place that's accessible, not just accessible, but that everybody wants to participate, right? In our sport, we have to come forward with new ideas. We're doing wonderful things. Please don't take it in any other light, but there are new ways to do things. And Rory, how many times a week do you hear that's just the way we do things?
And I have started to challenge those conversations, right?
Game for the
yes.
Everybody drink when you hear. I love that you mentioned that, because I was reading this article. I was struggling with this a lot. So a couple times, I can think of the top of my head over the last few months, at least twice, I was in a meeting where somebody said, look, I'm open-minded and I want to do new things, but we've always done it this way. And when challenged with, well, let's try a new way, the reaction is so bad. And I was really trying to dig into that of like, I haven't found the magic formula to like get over that hump. And so I was reading this article about what they called a false growth mindset. I think it was a Harvard Business Review article. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is the thing I've been watching, where people believe that because they are open-minded, right? I have an open mind. I have people from all walks of life, and I listen, and I like to learn, that they're open to growth. And when in reality, this article said something kind of magical. We're all a mixture of fixed and growth. And there are things that we're very fixed about, and we're things that we may be more growth minded. And so I'm very curious if this tracks with your experience in day-to-day, because you all see and feel this more than I do. But that was a big aha moment for me, where I was like, oh, that's what's happening. It's the false growth mindset.
It's funny is, it's okay to have a mixture of both. It's okay to understand realistically what your limitations are. However, being aware of those limitations, but trying to grow in other ways is really what makes you successful. There are times where, and I know Natalia has these conversations where all somebody needs is just a little nudge. All somebody needs is to be asked a question that they maybe weren't asked about. I think back to your conversation, Laura, a couple of podcasts ago with Lou, reflecting on our time in Dallas with the Thayer Group. Talk about a growth mindset coming from the Army and coming from kind of those military principles where they're challenging the status quo every day. However, they are an institution that has been around for hundreds of years, right? Yeah. So they can live in that fixed area of lore and stories and the past, but they're always evolving, right? They're always thinking about new ways to improve, whether that's technology, whether that's people practices, whatever it might be. So a mixture of both is okay, but still pushing yourself to always evolve is what is going to ultimately kind of get you leaning towards that growth mindset.
Natalia, do you want to add to that?
I just think it's tough, right? So I especially when it comes to a sport, because I do think we're a special, I was writing about this a little while ago because I was thinking about my own goals, right? Like, I think we're a very special place that has to do things because we are a sport in a different way than a normal organization. But there's still room for change. So I think when we think about a growth mindset, it seems to have become a very popular word. And we like to use it because we know it's better to have a growth mindset than not to have a growth mindset. I would rather someone say, well, I challenge that my method works better, versus saying, well, we've already done that, right? And I think we have to make it okay for people to challenge in the organization and change the terminology a little bit around growth mindset. to say, yes, I want you to have a growth mindset, but I actually want to challenge everybody in the room to be able to speak their voice and their ideas to see if we can get to that next great place, that next great USTA idea. So this is a lot about language and about having some language that we see as, this growth mindset. We all want it. We have it. We're going to say it. I have a growth mindset, but, right? So I challenge our association to think of greater words like, yes, we want a growth mindset, but we welcome all challenges to make ourselves great. If we're a sport and a sport that's competitors and competitors amongst other countries, let's really think, how can we be better? How can we be greater? And that sometimes and often means change. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I was thinking about like challenging each of my staff to sort of have two columns, like where are you most fixed in your mindset and where are you most open to new ideas and innovation? And wouldn't that be sort of an interesting exercise to go through to really challenge all of us to say, where are we more rigid in our belief systems? And, one great thing about FAIR that I took away from that, I think, I don't know if Lou and I touched on it, is sort of the culture and where those underlying assumptions, you might say, oh, we're all about innovation and we're all about change and we're all about this. But if the way we've always done things and continue to do things does not support that, people will see that disconnect immediately. So it's sort of like, how do we get ourselves to see where maybe we're blocking our own innovation and development and progress because we're so wedded to the way we've always done things.
And Laura, as the leader of USTA Florida, I think a lot of that falls on you to accept and be okay with failure, but turn failure on innovation into progress and learning moments, right? That fixed mindset is afraid to try new things because they're afraid of failure. Embracing failure means truly embracing innovation and expecting innovation from your team. But as a leader, really harnessing that into learning moments and saying, okay, what can we do better next time? How can we succeed next time?
And we've done that practice. I mean, one of the things I really appreciate about our team is we didn't call it an after action report. We actually called it a post-mortem, which is very, very much more negative. I don't know if that's more embracing failure or not, but we always have those meetings afterward. And what I found is that sometimes people are too nice to say what went wrong and to really dig in and they feel like it's almost, again, it's part of that culture. Well, if we did this event and Rory was in charge of, what happened on the tennis court that day, and I say, what I got from our customers was that this survey results show that could have been organized better. I feel like I'm throwing Rory under the bus. So some of that is taking away, like when we go into those meetings and saying, look, this is about the item and how it went, not the person who planned it or not the work being done. And it's really for us to evaluate. And this is a good learning moment. And I will say it is a continued work for us to do, particularly as new people come in, right? To really embed that culture that this is something we do every single time and say, how did this go? What could go better? And I think we do a pretty good job of it here, which is why we're able to try new and different things and fail and move along, but we could always do more. And that's part of the reason we had the meeting in November that we did, which was to encourage experimentation and failure and to do more of it and to really learn together.
Instead of the post-mortem, have you ever conducted a pre-mortem where you do the risk assessment prior to the event? And literally, it's the exact same formula.
We do it with all of our projects. So our project works do a risk register. That's part of our ingrained project culture. So most of the things that we try that are new are projectized for that reason and other reasons, because it's just proven principles. I think the day-to-day work isn't, right? And I do think that sometimes you see a different, right, on the project side, like why were they able to assess it, manage it, move through it better than maybe sometimes the work we've always done. So it's a good learning there to say, how do we take some of those practices and apply them to like our other day-to-day work and not just our projectized work.
And to your professional goal setting, that's basically what Rory and I are saying. That project plan is what will lead to success by having 100%. It defined, being able to be accountable to it and having your milestones. All that stuff's important.
Mindset, and I admit it, is that I'm just total project nerd. They know it here. And, it's like, look,
There with you, Laura.
follow
All
this
about the project.
process, it will work. I just trust the process, and I've had to learn, like, there are some things that you don't have to be as buttoned up about. You can be a little more free flowing, particularly in that ideation stage, and, less process oriented. So that's on my fixed mindset list, by the way. We kind of got into this question already, but as we're looking at USTA and our industry as a whole, I think we all know it's pretty traditional mindset a lot of times. What key areas of learning and development for staff and or volunteers, you could probably throw providers and others into that mix, do you feel like we need to focus on the most? And how is USTA fostering growth in those areas? So Natalia, maybe I'll start with you this time and then come back to Rory.
It's funny because I really thought deeply about this one, but we're actually conducting a needs assessment for the national staff because we want to be very intentional with our learning in the upcoming 3 years. I will tell you that soft skills are still critical, but is that really what we're going to double down on? No. I think helping create a culture of data-driven individuals is really critical. I also think focus on teamwork and process is important. I love that you just said that, the process and the ideation stage, but you're thinking about it, right? So I think looking at our processes is really important to see if we can find efficiencies. And those are skills that folks and leaders need to develop to be able to implement them throughout the organization. But more to come on that, because I hope you invite us back, because obviously Rory and I have a large body of work we're going to be working on, especially first quarter. If you see us, we'll be like 3 cups of coffee and
only 3? I probably have had 3 today already. This is a normal day. So
but yeah, I mean, for me, I think data is always critical. I think all decisions should be made based on data. I often hear people say things like, my gut is telling me. That terrifies me. Just as an FYI, that's like my scary moment. Maybe that's my fixed mindset where I get there. But yeah, I mean, I also think the way that the USTA is doing this is look at our department. Our department's really new. Our title is Growth, Learning, and Leadership. Our focus is really on all of the association, which is not just national staff, it's section staff and our volunteers. We want to make sure we give access to whatever we're creating to all of our association to grow the skills within it. Rory, what you got on your plate?
I want to focus on 2 things, and I think they're really important areas. Number one is this idea of leaders coming into leadership roles and giving them foundational competencies of leadership, right? And truly understanding what it means from going from an individual contributor to now I'm in charge of making sure that you are developing and we are accomplishing our team's goals. That's one area that I am excited to build out a little bit more in the coming years, because it's a really big need, not only for our organization, but the sections, even the volunteers, right? Coming into maybe a committee chair and giving them a bit more resources on, okay, how do I effectively lead a committee, right?
Yeah.
And those are important skills to have, not only to make sure that we are fostering really strong leadership principles, but we are fostering really strong people leaders to see growth, to inspire growth, to champion growth on their teams. The second area, and it's an area that Natalia and I are spending a lot of time, is talking about assessments, right? And how are we going to leverage assessments to realize some growth? And we are both certified in the DISC assessment, and we use DISC to not only learn about yourself, right, but to learn about what that means for interacting on a team. What does that mean for the team dynamic? So those are 2 areas that I think we're really excited about.
It's 2 small ones, Laura.
It's 2 little,
leadership development and teamwork and how teams come together. Very small things.
I think definitely have you back on the podcast then, because you'll have a lot to share once you're working on those things more.
And our team is like, I mean, we really are established to help, it was interesting during our town hall, we had to do this purpose statement. And for me, it was great to sit down and write that in a room full of USTA staff and to think to myself, like, we really are an enabling function, and we really want to enable the strategy of the organization and the association as a whole. And that sounds so lofty, but it really comes down to helping the individual really remember why it's so important to learn, right? And how it really makes their day easier, better. I'll bring up AI because I bring up AI in every conversation. I think about AI. If I could teach you 2 things to do in AI, it would give you at least 20% back of your day administratively, right? So small moments, but great wins. Rory and I are always talking about it, like, everybody has administrative work. How can we minimize a little bit of that so you have a little bit more brain power for the rest of the day?
Yeah, and that gets to leveling up. I mean, that was a large part of our leadership discussion that we had here in December, is that, growth happens when you let go of the things you're currently doing. And I think sometimes what I see inhibiting individual growth, like you talked about moving from that individual contributor to sort of that leader level, is like, I want to hold on to the comfort zone because I know how to do this job and all the minutiae of this job. So if you just kind of hand people under me, but I can stay in the same space, and it's getting that is that you have to move up. You have to move out of that space, develop someone else to take that on so that you can move up. That's sort of a shifting of people's ideation here and their thoughts on growth. They think growth means hire people under, and growth is no, you move up and develop someone to take your place, which is scary for a lot of people, right? It's super scary. And so how do we make that the expectation from the first day that you start here?
And it's scary if you've never done that before, right?
Yeah, totally scary. The other thing that you mentioned, I think both of you mentioned it, one of you mentioned it earlier, is that about the soft skills. And this is something I've thought a lot about probably over the last 3 or 4 years. I asked my team in December, we sat in a room and I said, what does good leadership look like? What is leadership? And they listed all the soft skills. Every single one of the things they listed was a soft skill. And so then I started to add things to the list. I said, well, what about making hard decisions? Are you willing to make hard decisions that people aren't going to like? And everybody in the room was like deer in headlights, right? And it was sort of like, okay, what about, directing work and all of these competencies we talk about? And I think that soft skills, absolutely, you can't be successful without them. But I asked the team, I said, why do people that have all these soft skills fail as leaders? What's missing from that equation? And I think it is sort of that combination of things, right? Is to say, what do we have? What don't we have? Are we too far in one area, whether it's a particular competency or a cultural thing, right? You can be too nice as a culture. You can be too harsh as a culture, right? So it's sort of like, how do you constantly build that team dynamic that it's the most diverse and balanced possible, and constantly keeping that balance so that the team feels like they can perform. So it's a never ending thing. And some of that is just leaders trying, failing, trying again, having different experiences and saying what went well there, what didn't. And it's hard. And so that's the hardest thing to develop the leaders in the organization. And we probably don't have enough of them. And so you end up with my next question, which is, when we look at ourselves as leaders, often, those of us in leadership positions have been around longer than many of our teams. Like, I've been here 12 years. I've been in this role for 6 years, and I know many have been around longer than I have. How can we avoid the trap of thinking we already know everything, because we've been there, done that, and focus more on our own growth and development and trying new things? So, Rory, maybe I'll start with you and then we'll go to Natalia.
Totally. And, Laura, the first thing that pops into my mind when you say that, and it's a focus that Natalia and I have had over the last 2 years, is emotional intelligence, right? And a tenet of emotional intelligence is that self-awareness piece, being aware of kind of how you are coming across and what your skill sets and limitations are. Oftentimes those tenured leaders, for whatever reason, tend to kind of shift into that fixed mindset, that self-awareness with new generations entering the workplace, new technologies, different dynamics that we're dealing with socially, being able to say, you know what, I don't know it all. I need to learn more. I can learn from my peers. I can learn from direct reports. I can learn from other resources is really vital to keep that growth mindset alive and well, no matter how long you've been a leader and no matter where you fall on the leadership hierarchy.
So this one's a really tough one, right? Because you respect leaders who have been in an organization for a really long time. They've been there. They do know a lot. That historical knowledge is so critical. And once again, leading with respect. I just think it's really the concept of going back to a growth mindset, right? That doesn't end. Nothing is fixed. If you look at the way the world is now, every 4 to 5 years, your skills will be mute. They will be mute. You will have to have truly a growth mindset and really a focus on learning and development. Even as a leader, leadership is changing honestly, I read a lot of research. This is the one space I can tell you it is ever evolving. Right now, we're going to a human-centered focused leadership. You can read in all the McKinsey and all the social sciences. So I think that no matter what, as a leader, you should be continuously trying to learn. You should be reading. You should be looking at other ways that people are leading and guiding teams, because your team will also be evolving along with the people on your team. This is a moment of inclusion. So when new members join your team, how are you inclusive of their ideas? That's such an important leadership trait. It's not just about growth mindset. It's about how you amplify the people that are on your team to really perform. And that really is what leadership is, getting the best out of your people.
You mentioned something earlier, which I think is really important. When we think about people who have been in the industry a long time, one of the observations I've made over the 12 years that I've been here is they often don't talk to people or entities outside of the industry.
Right.
And this industry has a way of doing that to you, right? It becomes all consuming in a way that all your time, conversations, and energy are sort of spent on tennis or on USTA. And purposefully, as a leader, going out there and saying, what other industries can I engage with and learn from that are doing different things? And going to conferences and meetings that aren't just USTA conferences and meetings, and keeping that perspective broad, because if you know that our industry maybe isn't a leader in certain areas, we use technology as an example, I think that's a fair statement that we're not really bleeding edge or cutting edge when it comes to technology. We may not even be near the edge. How do we sort of look at what other entities are doing and say, you know what can I learn from them and how they're applying things like AI or technology in sports? And, sometimes I think if we did a little bit more looking outside of ourselves, again, some of that awareness, like we might be as USTA Florida, we might say, hey, look, we're doing good work here, here, and here. But as soon as you sort of put us against another sport or another industry, you might say, wow, we're kind of far behind there. So your self-awareness as an organization or as an individual always is through the lens of what you're experiencing. And I often have a different perspective on myself or our organization when I go out to like ASAE or other conferences where it's other associations, because then I see, oh, okay, we're doing things that they're doing, or we're experiencing things that they're doing, or maybe we're a little bit more ahead in this one area, but a little bit behind here. And I think that type of benchmarking for leaders is very, very important. And it's certainly helped me over the last 2 to 3 years to kind of get out of the tennis bubble a little bit.
It's a continuous improvement mindset, Laura. That's very much what you're talking about. And that means you have to do external benchmarking and external research. And that's from curiosity. When we think about leadership traits, I think curiosity is one that's very powerful, and it's considered a future skill, is being curious and creative. So kudos to you.
Well, I mean, I work with a bunch of curious, creative people, and I don't think I would be successful if I wasn't. And that's very much, kind of the culture we have now. And one of the things that I always hoped was that the culture would then drive the organization, not the leader. And I think that we've gotten somewhat close to that, where even if I didn't want that to be the culture at this point, my power to change it is limited, because you've got 50 to 70 people owning that. and they, they want that type of change. And I think that's the world as a whole, right? We have different demographics, we have different, they're going to drive that culture forward, and you're either going to be, moving that train along with them, or you're going to be somewhere else.
Hopefully right where you are, Laura.
Well, I like where I am. I love my team, and with your help, we'll keep the train moving for many years. Okay, so my last question, for those who are listening to the podcast and maybe want to learn more or tap into some resources that could help them grow, what recommendations do each of you have? Can be anything, could be podcasts, books, education, training, wide open for what recommendations you would have. So Rory, I'll start with you this time, and then Natalia will let you kind of close it out for us.
Totally. And I think masterclass is a wonderful way to explore skills that typically you might not have an outlet to. So I love cooking and I love food, and masterclass has a ton of really great resources for learning how to cook from the top chefs in the world. That might seem like a really specific answer, but it helps me embrace that idea of growth mindset, right? So if I'm open to learning in certain ways, other learning potential and possibilities come a little bit easier. So I love Masterclass, and I want to encourage anybody who has not signed up for Masterclass, explore the website. They have a ton of different ways to learn, resources for learning on a variety of topics. So that is my plug for Masterclass.
Excellent.
So I have so many that I'm going to have to pick my top three. So Coursera online, actually, if you don't want to pay for the certification, the class is free, and their classes are wonderful. You can choose a wide variety of topics. You can also pay a little additional a month and get the certification. I also think if you're in our sections, there is content in our LRC, but more to come. Special announcement coming, more to come. Just hinting at it, 2024. But I'm a big fan of LinkedIn Learning. I've been using LinkedIn Learning for years, and I like it because I can pause it, stop it. I'm geeky enough that I've built my own learning paths to get to where I want to get to. So there's lots of things that LinkedIn Learning has, but I also think there's wonderful free articles online. I think everybody forgets the beauty of a library. Is there anything better than finding a great chair in a library and reading a newspaper? Because that's learning. So there's all kinds of ways that you can learn. And if you want to go AI, go to ChatGPT and you can type, I want to learn communication, build me a plan on how, and it will break it down.
And it'll do it for you. Yeah.
It won't do it for you, but it'll break it down.
It'll tell you how to do it. And pretty soon it will do it for you. So we're not far from that. That's all you. I'm like,
and Laura, I think
I'm a reader. Go ahead.
I think podcasts, and I think what you're doing with these podcasts is really great, not only for our association and kind of the ecosphere of tennis, but for learning and leadership in general, right? Like there are so many wonderful podcasts out there, and depending on how long your commute is, you could listen to one or two a day, right? And it's a great way to learn in a different environment and get content to people in a different way that they might not be used to. So podcasts are really wonderful, and I'm fully supportive of what you are doing. And I know I probably speak for both of us to say that we are delighted to be able to have this conversation with you, because we could talk about this for 4 hours, right?
I think my marketing team would not like a 4-hour podcast. I try, but I'm sort of, I will tell you that, sometimes people poo-poo podcasts. There's a lot of them out there. One of the great things you were talking about, how to do development when you're super busy, like how do you do professional development? One of the great things about a podcast is you actually can do it while you're walking or driving. And a lot of what I do, I walk or jog like an hour at night. And that was like a promise I made to myself earlier this year, that I was going to take that time for me, but I can still listen to podcasts then. And usually I'll read an article that links to a podcast, or someone will recommend a podcast to me. And it's almost always on a topic that I know nothing about, or I'm struggling with and I need to learn more. And I will use that on my walk. And most podcasts are an hour or less, so I can get a pod in regularly. Or if I'm driving on vacation, I listen to them sequentially. And I do think that there's a lot of pods out there, and I'm like you, Natalia. I'm a reader. I would say at night, I probably read 2 to 3 articles a night. If someone said, how do you have time for all of this? I don't do the Instagram, like that kind of social media, but at night I'll sit there on LinkedIn and I'll look for like 2 or 3 articles that really pique my interest on usually a topic that I feel like I'm not doing well, or something that came up that I'm struggling with, like what's happening here. So 2 to 3 articles a night, usually they're quick reads. I highly recommend The Atlantic. I mean, I will say that is one of, to me, it's like the gold standard of publications. And I know you have to subscribe to it, but I would say, just changes in the world and things that happen in life, everything from life to work to society. I feel like The Atlantic does great work, and they don't pay me to plug them, but I will tell you that I truly enjoy reading Atlantic articles every now and then when I'm
free at your library, at your local library.
There you go, at your library.
There you go. I'm plugging for the local library.
Yeah, and I haven't done masterclass yet, Rory, but I will tell you there's a couple that have piqued my interest over the year. I think James Patterson did one, and that was like one of the ones at times I almost subscribed to it. So I might get into the masterclass with you at some point in time. But for now, I'm a podcast Atlantic/book reader, very much a book reader and an article reader. So,
and one of, any way that you absorb new information or you learn, it's almost more important what you do with that information, right? So giving people a social outlet to share what they've learned. So creating these networks of groups to say, hey, I listened to this podcast. Here's what I learned. Here's how we can relate it back to what we're doing at work, right? So giving people that opportunity to socialize their learning is not only developing relationships and friendships at work or in the organization, but you're talking about it and you're making it real. It's real life, not just something you're listening to on your headphones.
I agree with that 100%. And I know we have BRGs and ERGs, and a lot of us can't come to meetings. If there was sort of a hub for, hey, here's what I read, here's a podcast, we've talked about creating that here because there's such an appetite for peer-to-peer learning and sharing, that I think that is something we're actually going to do here, which is to create a hub where people can share books and podcasts and other things that they've really gotten into, and create that sort of community that doesn't necessarily have to take an hour out of your day to have a discussion. Sure. But if you want to do that, feel free. Well, thank you both for joining me today. It has been a pleasure. I will certainly have you back on the pod later this year, but appreciate all of the work that you're doing, because I know it doesn't get seen or talked about as much, but it is so core and fundamental to the organization and our growth and success. So on behalf of at least USTA Florida, but hopefully the whole USTA, thank you both. And I'm very, very happy that you took the time to speak to me today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all for this episode of USTA Florida's Here to Serve podcast. I hope you enjoyed the topic. Please check our social media channels for more ways to engage with USTA Florida during our 75th anniversary year. And for more upcoming topics, dates, and episodes of the pod, visit